The scent of hospital-grade antiseptic still clung to the back of her throat. It had been 5 days since the birth, and Cordelia Sterling cradled the tiny life sleeping in her arms. Her newborn son, Leo. Wrapped in a soft receiving blanket, his body was astonishingly light, yet so warm. She held him carefully, as if he were the most fragile treasure in the world. "Congratulations on your discharge, Mrs. Thorne," the attending nurse said with a bright smile, picking up Cordelia's small duffel bag. "Little Leo is perfectly healthy." The bag contained only a few changes of clothes for Leo and her discharge papers. Its lightness seemed to symbolize Cordelia's own isolation from the world. Standing just outside the hospital room door was her husband, Caleb Thorne. They had been married for 2 years. With his arms crossed, he leaned against the wall, his eyes glued to his smartphone as he scrolled endlessly. Even as Cordelia emerged, his gaze remained fixed on the screen. The nurse called out to him in a cheerful voice. "Mr. Thorne, your wife is all ready to go. Congratulations." At the sound of his name, Caleb finally looked up, his expression one of weary annoyance. He shoved his phone into his pocket and walked toward them. His face showed no trace of a husband's joy or a new father's wonder. It was the blank, indifferent mask of a man who had just finished an inconvenient task. He made no move to take Leo from her arms, nor did he offer a hand to support his wife, who was still sore from her C-section. He simply snatched the light duffel bag from the nurse's hand. "Car's parked. Let's go," he said in a low voice, then turned his back and started walking away. Cordelia had no choice but to follow. A brisk autumn wind cut through her thin cardigan, making her shiver. Unconsciously, she clutched Leo tighter. "I can't let him get cold," was her only thought. In the hospital's circular driveway sat a familiar, jet-black car, a Maybach. It was a gift from her father, Harrison Sterling, for her 20th birthday. Since their marriage, however, Caleb had been the one driving it almost exclusively. For him, a young tech startup CEO, the car was a symbol of his success, the ultimate status object. Cordelia had allowed herself to believe, without a doubt, that Caleb would open the rear door, gently help her and Leo inside, and perhaps offer a kind word. "You did great," he might say, acknowledging the toll the past few days had taken on her body. It was a small, fragile fantasy. But Caleb didn't stop at the Maybach. He walked right past it, striding out of the hospital grounds toward a bus stop on the main street. Cordelia froze. It felt as if her feet had taken root in the asphalt. She couldn't move. Her mind went blank, unable to process what was happening. "Caleb?" The word came out as a choked whisper. He stopped and turned, an impatient scowl deepening the lines on his forehead. "What are you doing?" "I told you. This way." A sharp pain flared from her C-section incision. Gritting her teeth, Cordelia slowly walked toward him, a cold dread spreading through her like a fog. "Aren't we taking the car home?" Caleb gestured with his chin toward the bus route map, as if she had asked the stupidest question in the world. "You're taking that," he said. He reached into his slacks, pulled out a handful of loose change and a crumpled bill, and shoved them into her hand. The cold, metallic feel of the coins was sharp against her palm. A $20 bill and a smattering of quarters and dimes, just enough to get her back to their apartment in Queens. "This will get you to the apartment," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. His words sounded like a foreign language from a distant land. "My parents and my sister are coming over today. I'm taking them to that new steakhouse in the meatpacking district until I get home. I already made reservations, so I can't be late." Cordelia couldn't believe her ears. She stared at the cold cash in her palm, then back at the face of the man before her. This was her husband. In her arms was their 5-day-old son. "Caleb, I was just discharged from the hospital. It's only been 5 days since my C-section. Leo is only 5 days old. And you're telling me to take him on a city bus?" Caleb waved his hand dismissively, cutting her off. A look of open contempt spread across his face. "Don't be so dramatic. My sister was up and about 3 days after she had her kid. What's the big deal about a bus? It's not even rush hour. There'll be plenty of seats. Now hurry up, they're almost here." As if on cue, the headlights of the Maybach behind them flashed twice, and the deep rumble of its engine filled the air. Cordelia saw Caleb's parents and his sister, Brenda, walking out of a different hospital exit, laughing and chatting. They didn't even glance in Cordelia's direction, as they opened the doors of the Maybach and climbed in with practiced ease. "Look, your bus is here. Go on," Caleb urged, pushing her lightly toward the curb. "Just relax at home. There are some leftovers in the fridge. Heat something up for dinner." With those final words, he turned got into the driver's seat of the $500,000 luxury car that was supposed to be hers, and drove away, leaving her and their newborn son behind without a shred of concern. The red glow of the taillights was swallowed by the flow of city traffic, and soon disappeared from view. Cordelia stood alone in the cold autumn wind, holding her baby. In her right hand, the bus fare was damp with sweat. The bus arrived with a loud, rattling groan. The interior was mostly empty, but the air was stale with the smell of dust and exhaust fumes. Wincing with every step as her incision throbbed, Cordelia slowly climbed the steps. She slid the crumpled $20 bill into the fare box. The driver glanced at the pale woman holding a newborn but said nothing. She finally sank into a single seat by the window. As the bus lurched forward, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through her lower abdomen, and she gasped. The city flowed past her window, gleaming skyscrapers and glamorous avenues. The last 2 years with Caleb flashed through her mind like a slideshow. She had hidden her true identity as a Sterling, hoping to find a pure love, untainted by her family's immense wealth. In the beginning, he had been surprisingly gentle, sweet, and loving. But his attitude began to change, slowly but surely, after she became pregnant, and, more significantly, after he landed his first major project through the Sterling family's influence. His mother and sister started to openly sneer that Cordelia was an undeserving gold digger. The Thorne family was not the loving home she had dreamed of. It was a swamp she had blindly walked into, a foolish young woman who had chosen to close her eyes and heart to the truth. The bus stopped at a red light. In the next lane, the familiar black silhouette of the Maybach pulled up alongside them. Through the tinted glass, she could vaguely make out the figures inside. It sounded like they were laughing. Caleb was turned toward Brenda in the passenger seat, saying something. His profile was lit by a genuine, relaxed smile, a smile Cordelia hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. In that instant, her heart turned colder than it had in the autumn wind. It wasn't sadness she felt. It was a complete and total awakening, followed by an anger as cold and hard as ice. The light turned green, and the Maybach shot forward like a rocket, disappearing from sight. Cordelia looked down at Leo's peaceful, sleeping face. His tiny mouth moved from time to time as if nursing in a dream. Slowly, she took out her smartphone and unlocked it. She scrolled through her contacts, her finger hovering for a second over a name she had never once called herself. Then, without hesitation, she pressed the call button. The phone rang only once before it was answered. A deep, slightly worried voice, her father's, came through the receiver. "Cordelia?" She took a deep breath. Then, in a voice that was quiet but forged with an unbreakable, steely quality, she spoke to the man on the other end of the line. "Dad, can you help me? I want to leave him." The voice of Harrison Sterling on the other end turned ice cold, the initial worry replaced by a controlled fury. He asked, enunciating every word, "What did he do to you? Where are you and my grandson?" Cordelia quickly summarized the story, her voice breaking. "I'm on a bus. He made me take a bus home with Leo." A deadly silence hung on the line. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was low and powerful. "Listen to me, Cordelia. It's over now. You will not suffer for another second. I am sending someone to pick you up immediately. Do not go back to that apartment. I will handle the rest. I promise you that." He didn't say what he would do, but the promise was more terrifying than any threat. It held the weight of a colossal machine about to be set in motion. The sterile click of the call ending echoed in her ear. The bus continued its rattling journey. The quiet conversations of the other passengers, the mundane city scenery flowing past the window, it all felt like it was happening in another world. The fire of her rage had transformed into a strange, profound calm. A certainty that her words had already set a colossal machine in motion. A cold premonition that a man's world was, from this moment, about to be turned completely upside down. It was the eerie quiet before a hurricane, and it consumed her. Soon she arrived at her stop. Cradling the sleeping Leo, Cordelia carefully descended the bus steps, each one sending a dull ache through her incision. She was standing in front of the pre-war rental apartment that she and Caleb had once called their love nest. She didn't even have the energy to find her keys. As she stood frozen before the entrance, a black SUV glided silently up behind her and stopped. A Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Its sheer presence made passers-by turn their heads. The rear door opened quietly from the inside, and a stern-faced, middle-aged man in a black suit and white gloves stepped out. "Miss Sterling," he said, approaching her and bowing deeply. "Mr. Sterling sent me to escort you and the young master home. It was Mr. Graves." Harrison Sterling's fiercely loyal executive assistant of over 20 years. From behind him, two young women in crisp, professional attire emerged, a specialized baby nurse and a postpartum nurse, no doubt. With an efficiency that left no room for argument, one woman gently but securely took Leo from Cordelia's arms, while the other supported Cordelia's arm with a firm but gentle grip. The pressure was perfect, a professional touch designed to place no strain on her recovering body. Cordelia simply nodded, allowing them to guide her to the rear seat of the Rolls-Royce. As she sank into the thick, soft leather, it felt like sitting on a cloud. The air inside was warm and clean, a world away from the stuffy air and jarring movements of the bus. Mr. Graves closed the door, and the car pulled away smoothly, leaving the humble apartment and the 2 years Cordelia had spent there for love behind like a soiled and forgotten past. Their destination was not the home she had shared with Caleb, but the sprawling Sterling family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, where she had grown up. During the drive, Mr. Graves focused on the road, speaking only when necessary. The nurses attended to their duties with quiet competence, checking on Leo, offering Cordelia a water bottle, and placing a cashmere blanket over her lap. Everything was seamless and perfect. Cordelia leaned back and closed her eyes. Exhaustion washed over her like a tidal wave, yet her mind was strangely clear. 2 years with Caleb, believing she loved him, enduring the insults from his family, accepting a modest lifestyle, it had all been a miserable illusion, created by her own foolishness. There had never been any real love. There had only been a foolish man who grew arrogant, not realizing the prize he had won was the daughter of the Sterling dynasty and a family of hyenas flocking to the kill. Eventually, the car passed through imposing iron gates, drove up a long, winding approach, and stopped silently before the main entrance of a mansion that looked like a modern-day castle. The door was opened, and her father stood there. Dressed in a navy cashmere cardigan, he looked as imposing as ever, but she could see a faint crease of worry between his brows. He looked past everyone else, his gaze fixed directly on Cordelia, and then on the baby in the nurse's arms. "Dad!" Cordelia's voice was hoarse. Instead of embracing his daughter, Harrison Sterling took her face in his hands, his grip firm. He then signaled for the nurse to bring the baby to him. For the first time, he held his grandson. He looked down at Leo's sleeping face, a vortex of emotions swirling in his eyes, tenderness, pity, and a volcanic rage held in check by sheer force of will. "You're home. That's all that matters," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. He gave his orders to the staff. "Take Miss Sterling and the baby to her rooms and let them rest. Have the doctor come immediately." Surrounded by a team of household staff, Cordelia stepped into the grand mansion that felt both nostalgic and slightly foreign. The polished marble floors shone like mirrors, and a massive crystal chandelier cast a soft, welcoming light. The faint scent of sandalwood hung in the air. This was the world Cordelia Sterling was meant to inhabit. The world she had willingly abandoned. She was led to her old bedroom. The furnishings were all as she had left them, but in a corner, a top-of-the-line bassinet and an array of carefully selected baby supplies were arranged neatly, as if they had been waiting for her return all along. The family doctor soon arrived and gave Cordelia and Leo a thorough examination, declaring them both fine as long as they rested. A nurse redressed her incision, and a maid helped her change into soft silk pajamas. A bowl of warm, nourishing soup was brought to her on a silver tray. When she was finally settled and alone with her father, he sat down in an armchair opposite her and watched her quietly. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything that happened, from the beginning." Holding a cup of warm milk in both hands, Cordelia began to speak, starting from the morning of her discharge. She told him about the handful of cash for the bus, about Caleb and his family taking her car to go to a steakhouse, about seeing his smiling face from the bus window. Her tone was surprisingly flat. She recounted the facts dispassionately, as if reading a report about a stranger, without exaggeration or emotion. Harrison's expression didn't change as he listened. But Cordelia did not miss the way his hands, resting on his knees, were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Harrison stood up, walked over to his daughter, and awkwardly but gently stroked her hair. In that instant, the dam of Cordelia's composure broke. A sob escaped her lips, like a child who had finally found safety. Her father's large hand continued to stroke her trembling head in silence. "It's over now," Harrison said quietly. "You won't suffer anymore. From now on, Sterling Holdings will be your shield, and the boys. I will never let anyone lay a finger on either of you again. Do whatever you want." Even if the sky falls, your father will hold it up for you. Just then, the sharp ring of a telephone shattered the silence. It rang once, twice, a third time, insistent. A moment later, a soft knock came at the door, and Mr. Graves appeared. He bowed to Harrison, then glanced at Cordelia with a slightly troubled expression. "Mr. Sterling, there is a call from Miss Cordelia. It is Mr. Thorne. He is demanding to know where his wife is and is complaining that there is no food in the refrigerator. He wishes to know where she has been gallivanting." The words struck the last vestiges of affection in Cordelia's heart and shattered them into dust. No food in the refrigerator. Where have you been gallivanting? Those were not the words of a concerned husband to his wife of 5 days postpartum and his newborn son. They were the words of a master rebuking a negligent housekeeper. Harrison Sterling silently watched the color drain from his daughter's face. He slowly stood, removed his hand from her shoulder, and spoke calmly to Mr. Graves. "Hang up the phone, and block all calls from Caleb Thorne to this estate. He is never to be connected again." "Very good, sir." Mr. Graves bowed and left the room. Once again, it was just father, daughter, and the quietly breathing baby in the bassinet. Harrison walked to the massive mahogany desk in the corner and picked up the receiver of the internal line. Cordelia watched his movements as if in slow motion. His back was as broad as a mountain, and she could feel the volcanic rage simmering just beneath the surface. "It's me." His voice on the phone was as calm as ever, but its low timbre held an absolute pressure that could freeze the blood. "Pierce, sorry to call so late. It's an urgent matter regarding Caleb Thorne's next-gen innovations, the company you're funding in your Series B round." Cordelia held her breath. Sterling Capital was one of the core entities of Sterling Holdings, and Next-Gen Innovations was the company Caleb valued more than his own life. "Yes, that's right. Don't ask for a reason. As of this moment, Sterling Holdings has decided to cut off all support for him. I want you to move immediately to recoup your investment." "Yes, immediately. There's a material breach of the trust relationship clause in the contract. Use it." "Yes, I personally guarantee it. Inform the other investors of Sterling's position. I'll speak to the chairman of Metro Urban Bank myself. First thing tomorrow morning. His company's primary lender will send in a team for an emergency asset assessment." "Good. 48 hours. Within 48 hours, I want the name Next-Gen Innovations wiped from the venture capital map. I'm counting on you." He hung up the phone with a decisive click. A one-sided notice that lasted only a few minutes. But Cordelia understood that this brief conversation was nothing less than a death sentence for a company. With a single word from her father, the castle of sand that Caleb believed he had built would be washed away completely. There was no need to shout or rage. Simply stating that Sterling Holdings was withdrawing its support was enough. Money and people would vanish like a receding tide. This was her father's power. The true power of the Sterling family. A sense of strength began to seep back into her hollowed-out heart. She was no longer a weak victim. She was not the pathetic woman forced onto a bus, left with nothing but cold leftovers. She quietly rose and walked to the bassinet. She looked down at Leo's innocent face, his tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically, his fingers twitching occasionally. To protect this child's future, she thought, I can become a devil. This wasn't just revenge. This was a battle to win a future where her son would be treated as the most precious being in the world. As she thought this, the guilt that had been smoldering in her heart transformed into a flame called justice. Her father was already on the phone again, dialing another number. This time, it was likely the Sterling family's lead counsel. "It's Harrison. Proceed with the divorce. The other party is Caleb Thorne. Yes, the reason should be obvious. We will, of course, have sole custody and parental rights. There will be no division of assets. I want you to assess all tangible and intangible benefits he gained by exploiting his marital connection to my daughter and file a counterclaim for damages. Yes, make him pay back every last cent. I don't care what his lawyer says. Tell them if they don't accept our terms. We won't hesitate to litigate. Not that he'll have the resources left to fight a lawsuit. I'm counting on you." While Cordelia returned to her room, stripped off her robe, and stepped into a warm shower, Caleb Thorne's fate had already rolled past the point of no return. The hot water soothed her exhausted postpartum body. In the mirror, her face was still pale, with dark circles under her eyes. But she was aware of a new, cold light glinting in their depths. I will not cry again. I will not be looked down upon by anyone, ever again. When she stepped out of the bathroom, her smartphone, left beside her change of clothes, was vibrating madly. The screen displayed a name she knew all too well. Caleb Thorne, For a few seconds, she stared at the screen, her face blank. Then, taking a deep breath, she slid the button to answer. Before she could even lift the phone to her ear, Caleb's furious shouting erupted from the speaker, mingled with the shrill voices of his mother and sister in the background. "Cordelia, where the hell are you? Why aren't you answering the house phone? My parents are here and the house is empty, there's no food in the fridge. What kind of wife are you? Don't think you can get away with this just because you think you're some big-shot CEO's wife." Cordelia took a quiet breath. She brought the phone to her lips and spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "Mr. Thorne, Leo and I are at my family's home in Greenwich, Connecticut." The shouting on the other end stopped abruptly. The background noise quieted. He must have covered the receiver or moved to another room. After a few seconds of silence, his voice returned, a mixture of confusion and suppressed rage. "Cordelia, what are you talking about? Your family home? What family home? Didn't you say your dad was an apple farmer in upstate New York? Don't tell me you took my son and ran off to some hick town in the middle of nowhere. Don't be ridiculous. Get back here right now. Stop this stupid game." In his mind, she was still just a petulant woman throwing a tantrum. The fact that he imagined her family home as a dilapidated farmhouse in upstate New York was so pathetic that Cordelia no longer felt even a flicker of amusement. She felt only a bottomless pity. Continuing this conversation was a waste of time. Without another word, Cordelia tapped the red end call button. Then, without hesitation, she held down the power button until the screen went black. The world went silent. In the vast, quiet room, Cordelia just stared at the dark rectangle in her hand. The story of a man's downfall was about to begin. And the person who had pulled the trigger was, without a doubt, herself. She was the writer of this play, the director, and its sole audience. Gazing out at the jewel-like panorama of the New York City skyline in the distance, Cordelia whispered to herself, "You still have no idea, do you? You have no idea who and what you've made an enemy of." That night, for the first time in months, Cordelia fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. But she had no way of knowing that, in a high-rise tower in the heart of the city, Caleb Thorne was spending a sleepless night in a panic, fielding calls about inexplicable investment withdrawals that were nothing short of a death sentence for his company. His tragedy had only just begun. Like someone slowly surfacing from the bottom of a deep sea, Cordelia awoke from a pleasant sleep. A sliver of morning light pierced through the gap in the thick blackout curtains, faintly illuminating the room. The only sound was the quiet hum of the humidifier. As she sat up, she noticed that the pain in her lower abdomen, which had been so agonizing yesterday, had eased considerably. Perhaps her mental peace was promoting her physical recovery. A kindly-looking baby nurse in a pale blue uniform quietly opened the door. "Miss Sterling, are you awake? The young master has just had his milk and a diaper change. He is quite content in the nursery at the moment." Cordelia nodded, and the nurse led her to the adjoining nursery. In the room, kept at a perfect temperature and humidity, her son Leo lay in an exquisitely crafted crib, his clear eyes gazing at the mobile hanging above him. His peaceful expression was a world away from the baby being jostled on a city bus for a few dollars just the day before. This was the treatment her child was meant to receive. Cordelia felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling have requested that you rest well. Breakfast is ready. Would you prefer to have it downstairs, or shall I have it brought to your room?" "I'll go down." She had been cooped up for too long, her heart closed off. She needed to move. After washing her face and changing into a comfortable cashmere lounge set laid out for her, Cordelia slowly descended the spiral staircase. On the long table in the dining room, a magnificent breakfast was already laid out. A full American breakfast was prepared to perfection. Her mother, Eleanor Sterling, who never lost her composure under any circumstances, was seated next to the head of the table, reading the news on a tablet. Hearing Cordelia's footsteps, Eleanor looked up and gently set the tablet aside. "Cordelia, darling. Come, sit here." Her voice was filled with an undeniable relief and sympathy. "How are you feeling? Does the incision still hurt? Did you take the medication the doctor prescribed?" As Cordelia sat beside her, Eleanor gently took her daughter's hand and stroked it. "Yes, Mother. It's much better now." "Good. As long as you're home, that's all that matters." Eleanor had heard the entire story from her husband, Harrison, the night before. She closed her eyes for a moment, and her beautiful eyes glistened with tears. "You went through such a terrible ordeal, my sweet Cordelia. From the very beginning, I never trusted that man, Caleb Thorne." His eyes never smiled. "But you were so insistent." "Well, there's no point in saying this now." Eleanor gently touched Cordelia's cheek. Don't you worry. As long as your father and I are here, I swear we will never let you or Leo suffer even the slightest hardship again." Just then, Harrison, dressed in workout gear and glistening with sweat, came in from outside. He had just finished his morning training. Seeing Cordelia, his stern expression softened slightly. "You have more color in your cheeks than yesterday." As Harrison took his seat at the head of the table, Mr. Graves immediately served him a hot towel and green tea. He wiped his hands and, as if discussing the day's weather, got straight to the point. Regarding Thorne's company, the first investor officially sent notice of their capital withdrawal this morning. The bank is scheduled to send in an assessment team at 9 a.m. sharp. The waterfront redevelopment project he was banking on has also been scrapped. Cordelia slowly stirred the oatmeal in front of her. Her heart was as calm as a windless sea. In fact, she felt a slight dark amusement. A $20 bus fare, cold leftovers, and the catastrophic ruin he was now facing. The contrast was so stark, so ironic. Were there any more calls from him? Last night? Cordelia asked. Harrison sipped his tea. Yes, to the main house line. After 1 a.m., Mr. Graves answered. He said Thorne was quite agitated, shouting, "Where is she? Tell her to come home now." Graves, as instructed, simply informed him that you and the baby were resting and could not be disturbed, and then hung up. It was easy to imagine how enraged Caleb must have been on the other end of the line. He probably still thought Cordelia was angry and had run off to her family's farm in upstate New York. What kind of face would he make when he learned the whole truth? The thought of it was almost entertaining. During breakfast, the estate's phone rang again. After a brief exchange, Mr. Graves covered the receiver and turned to Harrison. "Sir, it is Mr. Thorne's father on the line." Eleanor's brow furrowed instantly. Harrison wiped his mouth with a napkin and said coolly, "What are his terms?" Mr. Graves relayed a few words over the phone and reported back. "He says he wishes to speak with you or Mrs. Sterling regarding the matter of Miss Cordelia and the baby. He suggests there may have been some misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Harrison scoffed coldly. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to instantly freeze the air in the dining room. He spoke clearly, for Mr. Graves and Cordelia to hear. "Graves, tell the man this. My daughter, 5 days postpartum, was forced to ride a public bus holding her newborn child because of his fine son's actions, with nothing but $20 in her hand. While his son, I might add, was driving my daughter's car to enjoy a lavish steak dinner with his entire family. Tell me, where in these facts is there room for a misunderstanding to be discussed? Shouldn't he be apologizing for his son's behavior first?" Mr. Graves repeated the words verbatim into the phone. The faint sound of a flustered man's voice could be heard from the receiver. But Graves replied in a polite but ice-cold tone, "I do apologize, Mr. Thorne, but Mr. Sterling is in the middle of his breakfast. I must let you go now." And the call was unilaterally disconnected. That merciless, absolute rejection was a more powerful blow than 100 of Cordelia's tearful words could ever be. Cordelia looked down and took a bite of her oatmeal. The warm food settled in her stomach, and the warmth calmed her in a strange way. After breakfast, her father announced he was going to his study to work. As he stood up, he glanced back at Cordelia. "Cordelia, come with me for a moment." Cordelia followed her father into the study behind the heavy doors. On the massive mahogany desk, a thick file of documents was already waiting. Harrison slid the file in front of her. "Read this." His serious gaze held a meaning far heavier than simple comfort or sympathy. Swallowing hard, Cordelia reached for the file with a trembling hand. The stack of documents Cordelia held in her father's study was not as simple as she had imagined. It was a cold, ruthless autopsy report, dissecting the fictional kingdom known as Next Gen Innovations, run by Caleb Thorne, down to the bone. With every page she turned, her fingers trembled slightly, and she could feel the blood drain from her face. Laid bare in stark numbers and chilling text was a reality mired in lies and filth, a world away from the glamorous success stories Caleb boasted about in magazine interviews. Falsified financial statements, a complex scheme for siphoning funds through multiple shell companies, massive debt from excessive capital investments made solely for show, and a record of precarious short-term loans repeated like a Ponzi scheme to keep it all afloat. In the margins of the report were countless notes in her father's handwriting. Memos indicating the betrayal of an executive Caleb trusted most, the financial weaknesses of his largest client, a fatal flaw hidden in the contract with an overseas technology partner. It was like watching a master surgeon precisely marking the cancerous tumors on a patient's X-ray, pinpointing exactly where to make the incision. Cordelia was stunned. The success of the man she had loved and trusted was nothing more than a fragile, dirty illusion. The Maybach he drove, the fancy restaurant meals, it was all just stage dressing for a dance on thin ice. "This is the true face of the man you chose, and the kingdom he built," Harrison said quietly, having come to stand behind her. His voice held less anger than a deep sense of resignation and pity. "It looks glamorous, but the foundation is rotten. The pillars are eaten away by termites. It could collapse at any moment. There are countless men like this in the world." Harrison returned to his desk, pulled a single chart from the report, and placed it before Cordelia. It was a flowchart outlining several scenarios for the destruction of next-gen innovations. "These are his critical vulnerabilities." Harrison slid an analytical chart towards her. "Next-gen innovations funding is almost entirely dependent on Sterling Holdings' reputation. Metro Urban Bank, his main lender, funds him because they believe we are behind him. His tech partners and major clients feel the same. They aren't partnering with Caleb Thorne, they're partnering with Sterling's son-in-law." Harrison looked directly into his daughter's eyes. "Now, the question is what we do. I can withdraw my credit guarantee. Once Sterling steps back, the other investors will panic and flee. The bank will immediately freeze his credit lines and call in his loans. It is the fastest way to bring everything down. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Once we start, there is no going back." Cordelia looked at the analysis, then remembered Leo's innocent face on the bus. The last of her hesitation vanished. "Do it," she said, her voice cold. "I want him to lose everything." Then Cordelia added, "But I have one request. When he has lost everything, abandoned by the banks, by his clients, by his partners, even by his own family in his moment of complete and utter despair, let me be the one to tell him why this all happened. Not because of a business failure, or bad luck, or someone's betrayal, but because of one single act, telling me, 5 days postpartum, to get on that bus." Harrison saw the same ruthless light in his daughter's eyes that he recognized in himself. He nodded, looking satisfied and, for just a moment, a little sad. "Very well, I will set the stage for you." Meanwhile, in the president's office of Next Gen Innovations, located in a prime downtown high-rise, Caleb Thorne sat at his desk, unable to hide his irritation. He still couldn't get in touch with Cordelia. Even if she had run off to her family's farm, her attitude was an insult. "She won't get away with this when she comes back," he fumed. As he stewed in his own self-righteous anger, the office door was thrown open without so much as a knock. His secretary burst in, her face pale. "Sir, it's terrible. I just got a call from JS Capital. They're demanding immediate, full repayment of their investment, citing a breach of contract." "What? Don't be ridiculous." "I just spoke to Pierce yesterday," Caleb shouted back. At that exact moment, the internal line on his desk blared. It was his CFO. "Caleb, it's bad. Metro Urban Bank just called. The review for our next round of funding, scheduled for next week, has been suspended. Not only that, they're sending in an emergency asset team first thing tomorrow morning." "What?" He couldn't process it. It had to be a mistake, a sick joke, but the nightmare was just beginning. "Sir, ABC Corp is on the line. They're pulling out of the ongoing project, effective immediately. They won't give a reason, just a comprehensive business decision. Sir, a top priority emergency email from our American tech partner, CoreTech. They're terminating the license agreement immediately. The reason cited is significant damage to brand image. I don't understand what's happening." Screams and panicked shouts echoed through the office. The blood drained from Caleb's face. His hands and feet went cold, and his heart felt as if it had been encased in a block of ice. What is happening? What the hell is happening? This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was systematically, deliberately trying to destroy his company. Who? Who would do this? A rival tech firm? A disgruntled former employee? The faces of several suspects flashed through his mind, but none of them had the power to orchestrate an attack of this scale, this fatal. It never once occurred to him that the source of it all was a single phone call made by the wife he thought he had so cleverly dismissed with $20 for a bus ride. In a full-blown panic, Caleb grabbed his smartphone with a trembling hand, trying to call his last resort a powerful political lobbyist with deep connections. He could fix this. But as he tapped the man's number, a merciless system message filled the screen. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. Blocked. His smartphone slipped from his limp hand. Caleb Thorne slowly collapsed into the president's chair he had built for himself. The gates of hell had just swung open, silently and cruelly. Several days passed after Cordelia made that fateful decision in her father's study. Her daily life was deceptively calm. Her postpartum recovery was smooth, and her doctor gave her a clean bill of health. Above all, the presence of Leo, whose expressions grew richer each day, filled her heart with a warm light. She rarely thought about her nightmarish days with the Thorne family anymore. It felt like a memory from a past life, distant and faded. One afternoon, as Cordelia was enjoying the sun on a garden bench with Leo, Mr. Graves approached, a hint of rare consternation on his face. "Miss Sterling, a package has arrived at the main gate from Mr. Thorne. He specifically requested that you receive it personally." A package from Caleb Thorne. A faint ripple disturbed the calm surface of Cordelia's heart. Could it be a letter of apology? Or perhaps the mementos she had left behind at the apartment? What could he possibly have to say? Leaving Leo with the nanny, Cordelia went to the grand entrance hall. There, on the floor, was a dirty cardboard box, the kind one might get from a supermarket. It was sealed haphazardly with packing tape, and, "For Cordelia Sterling," was scrawled across the side in a rough hand. The very sight of it dashed any faint hopes she might have had. "Open it, please." A young maid carefully cut the tape. As the box opened, out spilled Cordelia's cheap personal belongings from her life with Caleb. A worn-out dressing gown, a set of drugstore cosmetics, parenting magazines she'd read during her pregnancy. They were all jumbled together like garbage, and on top of it all, a single, folded sheet of paper was tossed in. Cordelia picked it up. Unfolding it, she saw Caleb's furious, almost illegible handwriting. The ink was smudged, a testament to his frustration and impatience. "Cordelia, enough with this disappearing act. What the hell do you think you're doing, running off with the kid? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused my mother and sister? Here are your things. Take them back. The house was a pigsty with all your junk in it. Be back by noon today, or else I'll get serious and take legal action. Don't forget, you are my wife, and that boy is a Thorne, the heir to our family." Cordelia read the letter to the end, her expression unchanging. No tears welled up, no anger surged. There was only a profound sense of disgust rising from the pit of her stomach, and a bottomless contempt. He still didn't get it. He had no idea his company was standing on the edge of a cliff, nor who was about to push him off. All he could think about was his own inconvenience, the annoyance of his property, his wife and child not being where he wanted them. This man was beyond saving. Cordelia crumpled the letter in her fist and, as if touching something filthy, tossed it into a nearby wastebasket. "Mr. Graves." "Yes, Miss Sterling. Please dispose of everything in this box. The clothes and books can be donated to charity. The cosmetics can be thrown away. I never want to see any of it again. As you wish." Seeing the absolute rejection in her icy voice and her eyes, Mr. Graves asked no further questions and bowed deeply. He immediately gave instructions to the staff, and the offending cardboard box was swiftly removed from her sight. That evening, the Sterling family held their monthly family dinner. Harrison's brothers, Cordelia's uncles, and her cousins all gathered in the vast dining room. The light clinking of crystal glasses, the rich aroma of French cuisine, the soft strains of classical music, it was a world of refined elegance, a stark contrast to the dinner tables of her 2 years with the Thornes. The conversation turned to recent economic news. One of her uncles, who headed the financial division of Sterling Holdings, casually remarked while swirling a glass of fine red wine. "Speaking of which, I heard an interesting story from the tech world recently. A company called Next Gen Innovations, I think? The young CEO who came out of nowhere is suddenly on the brink of bankruptcy. Quite a roller coaster of a fall." At those words, Cordelia paused for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering over her plate. Another cousin chimed in with amusement. "Oh, I heard about that too. Apparently, all the major VCs pulled out at once, and even his main bank abandoned him. He must have really angered someone you don't want to anger. Serves him right, I suppose. But what a spectacular crash and burn. There was no malice in their conversation. They were simply consuming the dramatic turmoil of the world below them as a form of entertainment. The fact that a man named Caleb Thorne's life was being destroyed was just another spice to liven up their dinner conversation. Cordelia silently brought a spoonful of consommé to her lips. The perfectly clear, golden liquid had no taste. Once, Cordelia had held a certain disdain for her family's coldness, their almost ruthless pragmatism, but not anymore. This overwhelming power, this logic that could sometimes appear cruel, was now the strongest fortress protecting her and the child in her arms. As long as they were inside this fortress, they would never be harmed. And whatever happened outside its walls was none of their concern. He just needed to be taught a lesson, Harrison Sterling murmured suddenly from the head of the table. With that single sentence, everyone present understood the entire situation. No one asked any more questions. They simply cast meaningful glances at Cordelia before quickly changing the subject. Those glances held pity, but more than that, they held a silent message of welcome and solidarity. Welcome back, Cordelia. You are one of us, after all. In that moment, Cordelia felt, for the first time, that she had truly returned to the Sterling family. The Cordelia Thorne, who had been Caleb's wife, was no more. Here sat Cordelia Sterling, daughter of Harrison Sterling, and mother to the heir who carried the Sterling bloodline. After dinner, she returned to her suite and was told by the nanny that Leo was sleeping peacefully. For the first time in a while, she turned on her smartphone. As it powered up, a flood of notifications for missed calls and messages appeared. Most were from Caleb. Among them was a single voicemail message. It was from Caleb's sister, Brenda. Out of idle curiosity, Cordelia pressed play. Brenda's hysterical, shrill voice burst from the speaker. Cordelia, where are you? It's all your fault. Caleb's company. It's a disaster. What did you do? Did you go crying to your rich daddy? You gold-digging witch. You'd better apologize to Caleb and get on your knees and beg your parents to fix this. If you don't, we have our own ways of dealing with things. You just wait. The message ended abruptly after the string of curses. Listening to it, Cordelia felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no fear. The sheer stupidity of it all just made a cold, faint smile appear on her lips. They still didn't realize that the door they were pounding on wasn't that of a simple country farmhouse, but the very gates of hell. Oh, I'll be waiting, Cordelia murmured to herself in the silent room. I'll be waiting from a front row seat to watch you all destroy yourselves. Brenda's misguided threat, far from unsettling Cordelia, only filled her with anticipation for their next pathetic spectacle. Their desperation would only accelerate, and they had no idea that it would only tighten the noose around their own necks. Brenda Thorne's hysterical voicemail left no ripple in Cordelia's heart. It was like the howling of a distant dog, a meaningless string of sounds that passed through her ears and was gone. Whatever their next move was, she was certain it would be as effective as a toddler swinging a toy sword against the thick walls of the Sterling fortress. As expected, their next move came 2 afternoons later. On that day, with her doctor's permission, Cordelia was taking Leo for his first stroll in his stroller through the vast gardens. The sky was clear blue. The leaves on the trees were beginning to turn, and a soft sunlight danced on the meticulously manicured lawn. Leo was dozing peacefully with the gentle rocking, and Cordelia was simply soaking in the tranquil moment. The silence was broken by the hurried footsteps of Mr. Graves. His usually stoic face was marked with an undisguisable look of bewilderment and distaste. "Miss Sterling," he began, "a report from the main gate security. Mr. Thorne's mother and sister have arrived. They have no appointment but are insisting they must see you." So they've come, Cordelia thought calmly. The fire engulfing Caleb's company must have finally reached their own feet, making it impossible for them to sit and wait any longer. And are they causing a scene at the gate? Not yet, Miss Sterling. However, their demeanor over the intercom is highly agitated. Cordelia stopped the stroller and turned to face Mr. Graves. Her eyes were as calm and deep as an autumn lake. "Mr. Graves, please show them to the garden gazebo." "Miss Sterling," Mr. Graves couldn't help but protest. "To have you face such classless individuals alone is far too dangerous." His concern was written all over his face. "It's all right," Cordelia interrupted him, her tone gentle but firm. "This is my home. I should have the grace to entertain uninvited guests. But I don't want the air in the main house to be tainted. The gazebo will do. Just have some warm tea prepared." "As you wish." Seeing her unwavering gaze, Mr. Graves said no more and bowed deeply. He immediately began issuing instructions to the security and household staff via his earpiece, his efficiency like that of a general commanding troops on a battlefield. Cordelia left Leo with his nanny, returned to her suite, and changed from her lounge clothes into a high-quality tweed dress. She was not going into battle. She was simply going to calmly deal with unwelcome pests that had trespassed on her territory. For that, an impeccable outfit was required. The gazebo, an elegant structure of cypress wood, was situated in the middle of the garden, surrounded by a serene stream where koi swam lazily. Cordelia arrived first and was sitting on a stone bench when 2 figures approached. their high heels crunching on the manicured gravel path. It was Caleb's mother and sister. Both were dressed to the nines in what were clearly their best, albeit dated, designer outfits. But their gaudy attire looked like cheap stage costumes against the refined elegance of the Sterling Estates gardens. Their faces were a grotesque mixture of awe at the overwhelming wealth and a desperate, greedy attempt to maintain their composure. "Oh, Cordelia, thank goodness. We're so glad you'd see us," the mother-in-law chirped in a fake, high-pitched voice, rushing into the gazebo and trying to take Cordelia's hand. Cordelia subtly but clearly avoided her touch, as if recoiling from something dirty. A flash of resentment crossed the older woman's face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "My, what a magnificent home! We were so worried about you. You should have told us sooner." Brenda followed suit, forcing a sycophantic smile. Her eyes darted around restlessly, appraising the value of her surroundings. "Really, Cordelia? Disappearing with the baby like that? It was so thoughtless of you. Mom and I were so worried we couldn't sleep." Cordelia said nothing. She simply picked up a cup of high-grade green tea a maid had brought and admired its delicate pattern, as if their presence were completely invisible to her. Her silence must have unnerved them, because the mother-in-law finally got to the point, adopting the air of a tragic heroine. "Listen, Cordelia, we're family, aren't we? If there was some misunderstanding, we can talk it out face to face. Caleb's company, it's in a bit of trouble right now, but isn't that what marriage is about? Supporting each other through the hard times? If you just hide away here at your family's home with the child, it only makes it harder for him." Brenda leaned forward eagerly. "That's right. As his sister, let me tell you, your behavior has been incredibly selfish. When a man is out there struggling, it's our job as women to protect the home and support him quietly. Now, come on, let's go home with us. Mom said she'll make your favorite pot roast for you." At those words, something inside Cordelia snapped. She slowly set down her teacup. The sharp clink echoed in the gazebo. "Go home?" she asked, finally looking them directly in the face. Her voice was quiet, but it had the temperature of ice. "To which home? The one where you told me, 5 days after giving birth, to take the bus? Or the one where there wasn't a single warm meal, only cold leftovers waiting for me?" The mother-in-law's face changed color. She waved her hands frantically. "Oh dear, Cordelia, that was a misunderstanding. Caleb was wrong that day. I told him so myself. He was just so preoccupied with work. He wasn't thinking straight." "Not thinking straight?" Cordelia cut her off coldly. "He had the presence of mind to drive my car, with all of you, to a high-end steakhouse. But he wasn't thinking straight when he handed his wife $20 to take a bus with a newborn baby." At this, Brenda finally lost her temper. Her shrill voice pierced the tranquility of the garden. "Are you still going on about that? What's the big deal about one bus ride? You're so petty. Right now, Caleb's company is about to go under. And you, his wife, instead of helping him, you're just digging up the past. How selfish can you be?" "Selfish?" Cordelia looked at Brenda and let out a small, cold laugh. It was a laugh of pure contempt. "Brenda, when you gave birth, how were you treated by your family? Weren't you served nutritious meals every day and told not to lift a finger for a month? But when it's my turn, it's suddenly natural for me to ride a bus and eat leftovers? Is there some kind of caste system for the women who marry into your family?" Brenda, struck where it hurt, turned beet red and was speechless. Seeing the tide turn, the mother-in-law switched to tears. "Cordelia, please. We were wrong about the past. I was wrong. I apologize. I'll apologize 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. But for little Leo's sake, you can't just stand by and watch Caleb go bankrupt. He's so little. How will he live without a father?" "Father." That word touched Cordelia's last nerve. She rose slowly and looked down at the two flustered women as an absolute monarch might look down upon her groveling subjects. "Father? What is that man to Leo?" Her voice was now a monotone, devoid of all emotion. "Are you suggesting that my son should rely on a man who would have him live a life of bus rides? Or a man who will soon be unable to even afford formula?" Cordelia walked to the edge of the gazebo, turning her back to them. Before her, the perfectly manicured garden stretched out. "Don't you worry. My son will have the most powerful support in the world from now on. Whether Caleb Thorne goes bankrupt or ends up on the streets is of no concern to me or my son." She turned back slowly to face the two women, whose faces had gone deathly pale. "This is my home. You are not welcome here. Do not show your faces here again." Cordelia declared it with regal finality. "Mr. Graves, please see our guests to the gate." Mr. Graves, who had been waiting discreetly under a nearby covered walkway, immediately stepped forward. He stood before the mother and sister like a gray stone statue and, with a polite but firm gesture, indicated the exit. Brenda tried to scream something, but she swallowed her words when she saw two burly security guards materialize on either side of Mr. Graves. She shot Cordelia a look filled with hatred and hissed through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this." Cordelia watched with cold eyes as they were led away like common criminals. She felt no satisfaction. Only an icy calm spread through her. "Oh, I'm sure I will," she murmured to no one. "I'll be waiting to see what foolish move you make next." This incident was merely a faint tremor before the real storm, and Cordelia was more than ready to watch from a high perch as the cornered animals did next. After the uninvited guests were expelled, the world returned to its perfect tranquility. It was as if a stone thrown into a pond had created ripples that vanished without a trace. Cordelia's days were composed of Leo's sleeping face, the scent of warm milk, and the soft sunlight in the garden. Caleb Thorne and his vulgar family were now foreign objects that no longer existed in her world. They didn't even cross the periphery of her consciousness. That peace was shattered a few days later on a clear afternoon. Cordelia was with the nanny, having just finished bathing Leo and wrapping his small body in a fluffy towel, when the internal phone in her suite rang quietly. It was Mr. Graves. "Miss Sterling, I apologize for the interruption." His voice was as flat as ever, but Cordelia sensitively detected an undercurrent of steely hardness. "Mr. Caleb Thorne is at the main gate. He is demanding to see you in person over the intercom and seems to be in a highly agitated state." Cordelia's hand paused for a moment. "He's here." The final actor had finally arrived on stage. "Very well," she said. Handing Leo's warm body to the nanny, she slipped on a robe and walked to her adjoining sitting room. On the wall was a large, integrated monitor that could display security camera feeds from all over the estate. With practiced ease, she used the remote to call up the feed from the main gate. She narrowed her eyes at the scene on the screen. The man standing there was not the Caleb Thorne she knew. The man who once wore bespoke suits with effortless confidence was gone. In his place was a gaunt, haggard figure in a wrinkled shirt and stained slacks. His beard was overgrown, his hair was greasy and matted to his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was a grotesque mask of desperation, agitation, and the childish confusion of someone unable to accept reality. He was shaking the heavy iron gate as a beast might shake the bars of its cage. "Cordelia! Hey, Cordelia! I know you're in there, come out!" His voice, even through the speaker, was cracked and hoarse. "We need to talk. Please, just come out. You know something about this, don't you?" Cordelia watched his pathetic display with no emotion, her eyes cold. It was like watching a nature documentary. There was no pity, no sympathy, and certainly not a drop of affection for the man who was once her husband. "Mr. Graves," she called him again on the internal line. "Let him stay there for a while. Do not open the gate. Do not respond to anything he says." "Are you sure, Miss Sterling?" "Yes. This is a necessary ritual." She quietly hung up. Then, with leisurely steps, she went to the bathroom, drew a bath with a few drops of aromatic oil, and sank into the warm water. Outside her world, a man was screaming as the castle of sand he had spent his life building crumbled around him. But inside this marble-walled sanctuary, there was only the calming scent of lavender and the gentle sound of running water. An hour later, when Cordelia, robed and towel-drying her wet hair, stood before the monitor again, Caleb was still there. He seemed to have exhausted himself from shouting. He was leaning against the gate, his back to it, panting heavily. He looked even more pathetic than before. She glanced at him once, then, having lost interest, turned off the monitor and went to her closet to select a fine silk dress. She sat at her vanity and meticulously applied her makeup. Foundation to even her skin, blush to add color, a sharp line of eyeliner. Each step felt like a sacred ritual, shedding her miserable past self and constructing a new one. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange. Caleb's shouts had faded into weak pleas. "Cordelia, please. I have no money, nowhere to go. Help me. I was wrong, I'm sorry. I'll do anything." His voice was so faint it was almost carried away by the cool autumn breeze. Eventually, as if his strength had completely given out, he slid down to the ground. The cold of the asphalt would be seeping through his thin slacks, chilling him to the bone. Inside the mansion, dinner preparations were beginning. The rich aroma of consommé wafted from the kitchen. The gentle voice of the nanny reading a picture book to Leo could be heard. This perfectly protected world, full of warmth and light. and the world outside the gate, cold, dark, and filled with despair. The two worlds were separated by a single, yet insurmountable iron gate. As dusk settled and the streetlights began to glow, Cordelia applied the final touch of lipstick. The woman in the mirror was cruelly beautiful and filled with an unshakable confidence. "Mr. Graves," Cordelia said into the internal phone. Her voice was as quiet and majestic as a queen's command. "That should be enough. Open the gate, and tell him this." The heavy iron gates opened inward with a silent, deliberate slowness. Caleb, who had been sitting outside like a vagrant, looked up with a start. A flicker of hope ignited in his hollow eyes. He scrambled to his feet and staggered a step inside the gate. Standing before him like an immovable stone statue was the butler, Mr. Graves, in his immaculate black suit. "Cordelia? Where's Cordelia?" Caleb asked in a raspy voice. Mr. Graves met Caleb's gaze with eyes as empty and hard as glass beads and stated in a flat, emotionless tone, "We have been expecting you, Mr. Thorne. Miss Sterling will see you now." "In the guardhouse?" "Over there." The guardhouse. The words, not yet fully understood by Caleb, registered only as a location. He didn't know it yet, but that word was the sentence that would strip him of his last shred of human dignity. He only knew that he would finally see Cordelia. Clinging to that last thread of hope, he stumbled toward the small, detached building Mr. Graves had indicated. The ad hoc meeting room inside the guardhouse was a sterile, cold space, a world apart from the opulence of the main house. A simple long table, a few pipe chairs. A security manual for the estate was tacked to the wall. It felt like an interrogation room. Cordelia was seated in a chair at the far end of the room. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and a fine silk dress that clung to her body. Simply by sitting there, she transformed the bleak room into her personal throne room. The door opened, and Caleb Thorne, prompted by Mr. Graves, shuffled in. He stopped dead in the middle of the room. He couldn't believe that the woman before him was the same Cordelia Sterling he knew. This was not the haggard postpartum woman, nor the submissive wife who had always bent to his will. This was a stranger, a queen radiating an overwhelming authority and a chilling aura that seemed to freeze everything she touched. Her beauty was almost inhuman, inspiring a primal fear that made it impossible to approach. Caleb was completely overpowered by her presence, frozen like a frog before a snake. "Why don't you sit down?" Cordelia spoke for the first time. Her voice was as clear as a bell, but it held no warmth. Like a puppet, Caleb collapsed into the nearest pipe chair. It squeaked cheaply. "Cordelia," Caleb pleaded in a hoarse voice. "Help me. I was wrong. Everything's a mess. The money, the company, my partners. It's all gone. But if I just have you and Leo, I can—" "What are you talking about?" Cordelia tilted her head. It was a gesture Caleb had once found endearing, but now it looked like the twist of a knife in his gut. "I don't understand a word you're saying. Whatever happens to your company is of no concern to me or my son." Her utterly detached tone made something snap inside Caleb. His pleading instantly turned to raw fury. "Don't give me that crap. Of course it concerns you. You're my wife. You lived off the money I earned? Who the hell do you think you are?" He shot up from his chair with a clatter. But Cordelia didn't flinch. She just watched his pathetic outburst with an expression of mild amusement. "Sit down." Just 2 words, but they were imbued with an absolute power that forbade defiance. Without understanding why, Caleb found himself sitting down again. "Money," he muttered, as if in a trance. "Yeah, money. If I just had money, I could start over. Cordelia, your family. They have a company, right? Sterling Enterprises or something? I know they're wealthy. If they just invest a little, I can start over. Please, convince your dad. I'm begging you." Caleb practically fell out of his chair, dropping to his knees on the floor. Cordelia looked down at his pitiful form with cold disdain. "You knew my family had a company, but you never bothered to find out what it was, did you?" she said, her voice a mixture of amusement and final, pitying contempt. "You assumed it was some regional manufacturing business in Connecticut. You were too arrogant to realize your success wasn't your talent. It was the Sterling name propping you up." Caleb looked up, his eyes unfocused with confusion and terror. "What? What are you talking about? Weren't you ever curious? Why your company was able to raise capital so smoothly? Why the doors of major corporations opened for you one after another? Did you really believe it was all because of your own talent?" Cordelia rose slowly. The silk of her dress whispered as she moved. Caleb wanted to back away, to run from this room. The woman before him was no longer human. She was a monster. Your father? Did your father do something? Caleb screamed. What could some old farmer do? It was the last and most foolish question he could come up with. Instead of answering, Cordelia walked slowly to the window. Through the blinds, she gestured with her chin toward the vast, illuminated gardens and the castle-like mansion beyond. You want to know who my father is? Caleb swallowed. His heart hammered against his ribs like a drum. Cordelia turned back to him slowly. Her face was now a complete blank, the absolute impassivity of a god judging a sinner. My father is the man whose face has graced the cover of the business journals you read every morning with such envy. He is one of the few men in this country who can move the economy with the flick of a finger. Cordelia took a step closer to Caleb. My father's name is Sterling. Harrison Sterling. Harrison Sterling. The name struck Caleb's mind like a bolt of lightning. The founder and chairman of Sterling Holdings, one of the largest conglomerates in the country. A man with immense influence in the financial world, a living legend sometimes called the Emperor of the Economy. Impossible. It can't be. My wife is the daughter of Harrison Sterling? Then who? What have I done? Caleb's thoughts shut down completely. His teeth began to chatter. As he stared at her in utter despair, Cordelia leaned in and whispered the final, fatal words into his ear. And the reason your company went bankrupt, the reason the bank turned on you, the reason your partners scattered like cockroaches, her lips curved into a slow smile. It was the smile of a demon. Is because I made one single phone call to my dad, all in exchange for a $20 bus fare. A choked, meaningless sound escaped Caleb's lips. All the dots connected. Why everything had been so easy. Why everything had been taken away so mercilessly. What he had done to his wife. 5 days postpartum. He had put her on a cold bus with their newborn son while he went to eat steak with his family, in her car, paid for with her money. The look on Cordelia's face at the bus stop flashed in his mind. The eyes that held despair, resignation, and an anger as cold as ice. At that moment, he had smeared mud on the daughter of a god. Arg! An inhuman scream tore from Caleb's throat. He clutched his head and collapsed, like a puppet with its strings cut. No, no, no! This can't be happening! He rolled on the floor, clawing at his own hair. But the more he struggled, the more the overwhelming truth mercilessly consumed his consciousness. Cordelia gave his writhing form one last, cold glance. She had no more interest in him. A broken toy was of no use. She silently turned her back on him and walked toward the door, never looking back. The heels of her shoes clicked with a regular, cold rhythm on the concrete floor. Click, clack, click. The sound was like a countdown to the end of Caleb Thorne's life. As she placed her hand on the doorknob, Cordelia murmured one final thing. Goodbye, Caleb Thorne. The world will surely be a wonderful place without you in it. The door closed quietly. Left in the room was a single, completely broken man, clawing at the floor and letting out animalistic sobs. Had his fate been sealed here? No. The real hell was just beginning. Leaving the broken doll named Caleb Thorne behind in the guardhouse, Cordelia returned to the main house without a single backward glance. With every click of her heels on the marble floor, it felt as if another remnant of her past was being shed. She went to her father's study and announced with a single word, "It's done." Harrison Sterling simply nodded and pushed a glass of fine brandy toward her. As she took a sip of the amber liquid, Cordelia realized that the second chapter of her life had just quietly begun. The following day, the Sterling estate returned to its perfect, undisturbed peace. Caleb Thorne's name was never mentioned, as if he had never existed. Cordelia spent her days calmly, with Leo's growth as her sole focus. The warmth of his tiny hand gripping her finger, the angelic smile that appeared in his sleep each moment was a precious gem that healed her past wounds and nurtured hope for the future. But those cast into the abyss were not about to remain silent. The first contact came from Caleb's father. 2 days after the traumatic encounter in the guardhouse, he shamelessly called the Sterling estate's main number again. Of course, he was not put through to Harrison or Cordelia. The call was handled by Mr. Graves. And what was his demand? Harrison asked from the dining room, not looking up from his morning paper. Mr. Graves reported respectfully. Mr. Thorne's father stated that his son returned home completely broken. It was only then that he learned the full truth and was, in his words, profoundly shocked. He said that as a parent, he wishes to sincerely atone for his son's grave disrespect, but tearfully begged for mercy, pleading that we not completely foreclose any future for his foolish son. Mercy? Harrison folded his newspaper and laughed coldly, a word he never considered when his son was ruining another's daughter's life. And how did you reply, Graves? As you instructed, sir. I informed him that the Sterling family always proceeds based on principle. The first order of business is for his son to make full and sincere restitution for all the disrespect shown to your daughter. If there is anything to discuss after that has been completed, he may contact us again. It was, in effect, a complete shutdown of negotiations. The easy path of appealing to pity and emotion was now permanently closed. Excellent. Respond in the same manner to any future contact from anyone in the Thorne family. The only path left for them is to accept all of our demands. Cordelia listened to the exchange silently while feeding Leo pureed apple. They still didn't understand their position. They thought an apology would be enough. Their hopelessly optimistic and self-centered thinking no longer angered her. It just filled her with a deep sense of revulsion. And a cornered animal, having exhausted all other options, always resorts to the same final desperate act. That afternoon, the incident occurred. Cordelia was in the greenhouse with her mother, enjoying pruning some herbs, when Mr. Leah Graves rushed in, his face a mask of unprecedented haste and unconcealed contempt. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, Miss Sterling, his voice was slightly breathless. We've just received urgent calls from the local police precinct and the neighborhood association. Caleb Thorne's mother and sister, along with two rather dubious-looking individuals, are causing a disturbance at the main entrance to the Greenwich community. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. What? What on earth are they trying to do? They've contacted a tabloid, ma'am. An article just went live online. What is the content? Mr. Graves hesitated for a moment, then, steeling himself, reported the facts. The headline reads, Ice Queen Hyris holds son hostage, abandons bankrupt husband. They've provided old family photos and spun a sob story about how Cordelia suddenly vanished with the child, cutting off all contact, while Caleb was struggling to save his career. They're painting a picture of you as a heartless wife, manipulated by your wealthy family. Eleanor, speechless at their shameless audacity, turned white and began to tremble. The pruning shears in her hand clattered to the floor. How utterly ignorant! To turn their son's monstrous behavior back on my daughter. They will be struck down by heaven for this. But Harrison was surprisingly calm. He set down the watering can he was holding and turned to Cordelia. Cordelia, what do you think? Cordelia gently placed a sprig of rosemary on the table. She felt no anger. Only a resigned, of course, and a bottomless contempt. This was the best they could come up with. Cause a scene, paint themselves as tragic victims, and try to win public sympathy. A cheap, pathetic charade straight out of a tabloid magazine. It's like the monkey enclosure at the zoo, she said quietly. Call the police. Have them arrested on the spot for defamation and obstruction of business. Then immediately send our lawyers to the station and apply maximum pressure to have them detained. And Mr. Graves, she continued, discreetly leak this information to the media contacts on your list. Don't use our names. Just report that the family of a failed tech startup CEO, in a fit of bitter resentment, caused a public disturbance in one of the nation's most exclusive residential areas and ended up in police custody. I'm sure they'll write a sensational story. It's time they learned, firsthand, how the world will see them. At her cold, precise instructions, Harrison's lips curled into a slight, satisfied smile. He nodded to Mr. Graves. Do as my daughter says. However, Harrison added, wait to call the police. Let them marinate in their own foolishness until they reach the peak of their absurdity. We must not be the aggressors. We must be the poor victims, harassed by unreasonable madmen, and have the entire scene recorded in high definition. It will be invaluable evidence later on. At once, sir. Mr. Graves bowed and exited. A few minutes later, the monitor in Cordelia's suite showed a grotesque scene in real time, completely at odds with the elegant streetscape of Greenwich. Caleb's mother and Brenda, brandishing cheap, handwritten signs, their faces red as they screamed into a megaphone. A crowd of onlookers was gathering, filming the spectacle on their smartphones. Luxury cars honked impatiently as they tried to navigate around the commotion. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. This is a human rights violation. Brenda's shrill voice could be heard faintly through the speaker. She lunged at a young woman trying to pass by, screaming something in her face. Her eyes were completely bloodshot. She was clearly unhinged. It was a carnival of clowns. Cordelia watched the scene with a blank expression. They didn't realize that their every ugly gesture, every foolish word, was being meticulously recorded as perfect evidence for their own social execution, all orchestrated on the palm of the Sterling family's hand. In the corner of the monitor, a smaller window showed the feed from a hidden camera, likely operated by an investigator sent by Mr. Graves. Its high-performance lens coldly, mercilessly zoomed in on Brenda's screaming, distorted face. Soon, the whole country would see this spectacle. Cordelia quietly turned off the monitor. It wasn't worth watching anymore. After glancing at the clown show on the monitor, Cordelia stepped out onto her suite's balcony and took a deep breath of the cool, crisp air. The stage of being emotionally affected by their actions was long past. No matter how much they screamed and shouted, their noise would never penetrate the high walls surrounding the Sterling estate. It was just static. All that was left was to wait for the sophisticated trap set by her father and Mr. Graves to ensnare its prey. Cordelia returned to Leo's nursery. On the soft carpet, her son was happily chewing on a wooden block. Watching his innocent form, the vulgar commotion at the gate felt like an event in a distant foreign country. She sat beside him and gently stroked his soft hair. This child's future, this child's smile, that was what she had to protect. Everything else was irrelevant. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the Greenwich community, the climax of the drama was unfolding exactly as Harrison had scripted. Just as Brenda's frenzy reached its peak at the very moment she grabbed the arm of a woman trying to pass and shrieked, "What? Are you on their side too?" Several police cars appeared as if from nowhere, silently but overwhelmingly surrounding them. "You are under arrest for obstruction of business and defamation. You'll have to come with us down to the station." At the calm but firm voice of the police officer, Brenda and her mother stared blankly for a moment. Then, as they realized they were being arrested, they began to wail hysterically once again. "What? What did we do? We're the victims here. Give us back our son! Give us back our grandson!" But their pathetic resistance was futile against the stoic officers. The two of them, along with the dubious men they had hired, were unceremoniously bundled into the back of the patrol cars like sacks of garbage. The entire scene was captured from every angle by the smartphones of the onlookers and, from the shadows, by the professional-grade camera of the Sterling's investigator. And that night, on the front page of the nation's largest online news portal acting on a tip from the Sterling family, a sensational headline was quietly posted. Exclusive, family of tragic tech CEO in bitter rampage, occupy exclusive neighborhood. Shocking video reveals all. The article, while feigning a sympathetic tone, was masterfully constructed to condemn the Thorns. Next-gen innovation CEO Caleb Thorne, once hailed as a wonderkind of the tech industry, now faces ruin. However, sources reveal a history of reckless management and suspected accounting fraud behind his success. With his company in de facto bankruptcy and buried in debt, Thorne's family has taken shocking action. The article was peppered with the clearest, most unflattering footage prepared by Mr. Graves. Brenda, her face twisted in a snarl. Her mother collapsed on the ground, sobbing. Their image was not of tragic victims, but of unhinged, pathetic lunatics. Furthermore, the article quoted an anonymous financial industry insider to leak the most decisive piece of information. Mr. Thorne's wife is reportedly the daughter of one of the country's most prominent families, a fact he was unaware of when they married. There are even rumors that just 5 days after she gave birth, he forced her and their newborn onto a public bus while he took her luxury car to go to a steak dinner with his family. It is whispered that the quiet rage of his wife's family over his inhumane actions may be the real story behind his company's dramatic downfall. The article was a bombshell. Within an hour of being posted, the comment section exploded. On social media, the hashtag #BitterFamily went viral. The entire country pounced on the trashy, real-life drama. He totally deserved it, LOL. Forcing your wife on a bus 5 days postpartum to go eat steak? That's a character issue. Just saw the video. They're acting like total thugs. No wonder his company failed. Go, wife's family. GJ, take them down completely. Digital tattoo. This family's life in this country is over. Public opinion turned completely and overwhelmingly against the Thorne family. Their last-ditch appeal to the public had resulted in the worst possible outcome: the public execution of their own social lives by their own hands. In her suite, Cordelia quietly read the articles and the flood of scathing comments on her tablet. Her face was blank. Just deserts, she thought. That's all. There was no need to dirty her own hands. They were destroying themselves with their own foolishness. Meanwhile, in a bleak interrogation room at the police station, Brenda and her mother were facing off against a team of seasoned lawyers dispatched by the Sterling family. Regarding this matter, One of the lawyers stated calmly, each word carrying immense weight. In addition to criminal charges for defamation and obstruction of business, we will be filing a civil suit for damages. For the damage to the Sterling family's brand image and the emotional distress caused to Miss Sterling, we will be seeking initial compensation in the amount of $3 million. 300 million. At that number, the color completely drained from Brenda and her mother's faces. They finally understood, down to their very bones, that they had smeared mud on a godlike entity they should never have antagonized. They no longer had the energy to even scream. All the pieces were falling perfectly into place. Cordelia turned off her tablet and gazed out at the quiet nightscape. It was all over. Or rather, she had ended it. Just then, Cordelia's personal cell phone rang quietly. The name on the screen was that of the female lawyer she had personally hired. Hello? Mrs. Sterling, my apologies for the late hour. I have an update for you, the lawyer's voice was, as always, calm and professional. What is it? We just received a call from Caleb Thorne's legal counsel. The lawyer paused for a beat. They have informed us that they will accept all of our proposed terms, unconditionally. They are requesting a full settlement. The news of the Thorne family's unconditional surrender brought no sense of victory to Cordelia's heart. It was merely the inevitable conclusion, like watching an opponent in chess, having been checkmated, quietly tip over his king. She coolly instructed her lawyer to arrange the signing of the divorce agreement as soon as possible. A week later, the stage for this final ceremony was set in the royal suite of one of the city's most luxurious hotels, owned by Sterling Holdings. The room, normally reserved for heads of state and global VIPs, now opened its heavy doors for the sole purpose of putting a merciless end to one family's history. For the occasion, Cordelia chose a sharp, black pantsuit. Its clean lines seemed to symbolize her wedded resolve. Her makeup was minimal, but her eyes held a powerful light that could pierce through anyone. When she arrived on the top floor of the hotel, the general manager bowed deeply and escorted her to the suite. Inside, her personal legal team and the elite lawyers from Sterling Holdings were already waiting, exuding an aura of impeccable readiness. They all stood and bowed their heads as she entered. Cordelia slowly sat down in a regal, throne-like chair placed by the window. Below her, the cityscape of New York spread out like a miniature model in the twilight. 15 minutes after the appointed time, a soft knock came at the door. Caleb Thorne, accompanied by his lawyer, entered the room. Everyone present held their breath. The man who entered was a mere shell, having lost even the basic contours of a human being. He was even thinner than when she had last seen him in the guardhouse, his cheeks sunken in an unhealthy way. The ill-fitting, cheap suit he wore looked like a hand-me-down, and his vacant eyes refused to focus on anything in the room. He stared at a spot on the plush carpet, his back hunched like an old man, and walked with an unsteady gait. When he noticed Cordelia seated by the window, radiating an overwhelming presence, Caleb's shoulders flinched. As if shielding his eyes from a blinding light, he looked down and, prompted by his lawyer, collapsed weakly into a chair on the opposite side of the long table. The vast table separating them was a physical representation of the distance between their two lives, which would now never cross again. Cordelia's lead lawyer stood up quietly. Her cold voice broke the heavy silence. We will now proceed with the signing of the divorce agreement between Miss Cordelia Sterling and Mr. Caleb Thorne. Mr. Caleb Thorne. Thorne and your counsel, I trust you have reviewed the contents in advance, but for final confirmation, I will read aloud the main points. The lawyer looked down at the thick document in her hands. Her voice was devoid of all emotion. Only the facts, one by one, stabbed into Caleb's heart like cold knives. Article 1. Sole legal and physical custody of the minor child, Leo Sterling, shall be granted to the mother, Cordelia Sterling. Article 2. Caleb Thorne shall be exempt from child support payment obligations. This, however, is conditional upon the complete and total waiver of permanent visitation rights, as stipulated in the next article. Article 3. Caleb Thorne, of his own volition, hereby permanently relinquishes all present and future visitation rights to his son, Leo Sterling, and is forbidden from attempting any contact or communication with Cordelia Sterling, Leo Sterling, or any of their associates for any reason whatsoever. Caleb's body began to tremble. Article 4. Regarding the division of assets, both parties acknowledge that the contributions of Cordelia Sterling and her family, both tangible and intangible, were absolute in the formation of any assets acquired during the marriage. Therefore, Caleb Thorne completely waives any and all claims to the division of property. Article 5. Regarding damages, Caleb Thorne admits to causing severe mental and physical distress to Cordelia Sterling during the marriage and to significantly damaging her reputation. As compensation for these damages, he shall pay Cordelia Sterling the sum of $5 million. The payment method shall be determined separately. $5 million. As the number was read aloud, a strangled, whimpering sound escaped Caleb's throat. Wait. Please. It was a voice as faint as a fly's buzzing. I can't pay that kind of money. And to never see Leo again? I can't. He tried to look at Cordelia with pleading eyes, but her gaze remained fixed on the evening view outside the window. She never once turned to look at him. His lawyer, sitting beside him, gently grabbed his arm with a look of utter resignation. Mr. Thorne, sign it. This is the best possible outcome we could have achieved. If we fight this any further, you will be left with absolutely nothing. Those words were the final blow. All strength drained from Caleb's body. He sank deep into his chair like a marionette with its strings cut. He covered his face with his hands, and from between his fingers, suppressed, animalistic sobs began to escape. Was it regret? Despair? Or was it self-pity for his own pathetic state? Cordelia listened to his sobs, as one might listen to a distant storm, with no emotion at all. A few minutes later, Caleb lifted his tear-streaked face. His eyes were bloodshot, and the light of reason was gone. The last glint of pleading in his eyes had transformed into a complete and bottomless hatred. Cordelia Sterling, he rasped. You are a monster. That was the last thing he managed to say. Cordelia still did not look at him. She simply gestured with her chin to the lawyer standing beside her. Continue. The lawyer slid 2 copies of the agreement and a Mont Blanc fountain pen to the center of the table. Mr. Thorne, please sign here. Caleb grabbed the pen with a trembling hand. It felt as heavy as a block of lead. He glared at the signature line on the agreement with hateful eyes, then looked back at Cordelia one last time. His gaze promised to curse this sight, to curse her, for all eternity, even from the depths of hell. Finally, as if resigned to his fate, he slumped forward. He scrawled a furious, illegible, but undeniably authentic signature in the designated space. After signing, he threw the pen down, leaned back heavily in his chair, and closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear to see anything anymore. Caleb's lawyer confirmed the signature and added his own. The agreement was then silently pushed across the table to Cordelia. Cordelia picked up a different pen, a Cartier fountain pen she had brought herself. Without a moment's hesitation, in a fluid, powerful script, she signed Cordelia Sterling. Those 2 words were a more eloquent testament than anything else to her complete break with the past and her unwavering declaration for the future. After signing and capping her pen, Cordelia rose quietly. I'll leave the rest to you, she told her legal team. Then, without once looking at the man collapsed on the floor, she walked with regal composure toward the exit. She opened the heavy door of the suite and stepped out into the hallway. In that instant, the night view of New York, a carpet of scattered diamonds, filled the polished windows. She stood there for a moment, silently gazing at the sea of lights. One life had ended, and another was about to begin. Did her heart swell with the elation of victory, or the emptiness that comes after total destruction? Cordelia herself did not know. But one thing was certain, she would never look back. Her new story was quietly beginning, out there, beyond those countless lights. A week after the signing in the hotel suite, Cordelia received a call from her lawyer informing her that all legal procedures were complete. The name on her official records, once stained with a name she despised, had been quietly restored to what it should have been, Sterling. She received the news while sitting on the sofa in her suite, feeding Leo a bottle. There was no great emotion, no elation, just a deep, quiet sense of relief, like finally taking off a tight, ill-fitting suit she had been forced to wear for years. As part of his professional report, the lawyer also coolly added an update on Caleb Thorne's situation. Next-Gen Innovations was already under the control of a bankruptcy trustee, its remaining assets being liquidated to the last penny for distribution to creditors. The high-rise apartment he had considered his last bastion had been seized by the bank and would soon be put up for auction. He personally now bore a debt of $5 million in damages, a sum astronomical to any ordinary person. It was a cross he would bear forever, as the Sterling legal team had structured the settlement to prevent it from being discharged through bankruptcy. Abandoned by friends, relatives, and even the mother and sister who had once adored him, he had effectively vanished from society. No one knew his exact whereabouts. Rumor had it he was working day laborer jobs under a false identity, moving between cheap motels on the outskirts of the city. Cordelia listened to the report while gently wiping a drop of milk from Leo's lips. She felt nothing. No hatred, no pity, and no nostalgia for the man she once loved. Caleb's fate was, to her, like hearing a news report about a stranger in a foreign country. He was no longer a character in her life's story. He had been demoted to a piece of information. The wreckage of the past was being cleared away, legally and socially. But one final piece of debris still remained in Cordelia's heart, a heavy weight that needed to be settled. Several weeks after the divorce was finalized, on a clear autumn day, Cordelia gave an order to Mr. Graves. "Mr. Graves, please have that Maybach from the west garage brought to the main entrance." For a moment, Mr. Graves looked at her, trying to divine her intention, but he asked nothing. "At once, Miss Sterling," he said with a deep bow. Soon, with the deep rumble of its engine, the jet-black car glided into the circular driveway. Its perfectly polished body reflected the autumn sun, gleaming as if it were wet. Cordelia, having left Leo with his nanny, stood alone before it. The Maybach, a symbol of celebration, a gift from her father for her 20th birthday. It had become a tool for Caleb's vanity and greed, and the vessel for the deepest humiliation of her life. Cordelia gently touched its cold hood. The smooth, hard sensation traveled up her fingertips. Every time she saw this car, the cold wind at the bus stop, the handful of cash, the sound of Caleb's family laughing as they drove away in it all came rushing back. It wasn't anger she felt, nor hatred. What welled up in her chest was an overwhelming pity for her past self. How could I not have seen it? How could I have believed I loved a man like that? This car was no longer a symbol of teleprite. This car was the embodiment of the foolish, miserable Cordelia Sterling of the past, who had been blinded by his lies and had lost sight of her own worth. "Mr. Graves," Cordelia said, her eyes still on the car. "I am getting rid of this car. Shall I contact the dealership, Miss Sterling?" "No," she said, shaking her head firmly. "Have the Sterling Asset Management Company sell it through official channels. And donate the entire proceeds, anonymously in my name, to the National Network to End Domestic Violence." "Are you certain, Miss Sterling?" "Yes." Cordelia finally looked away from the car and up at the clear autumn sky. "If this car can be used to help mothers and children who, like my former self, are being mistreated and isolated from society, then perhaps the humiliation etched into it can be redeemed, just a little." There was no longer any hesitation in her voice. A few days later, a large car carrier quietly entered the sprawling Sterling estate. It was the day the Maybach was to be picked up. Cordelia, holding Leo in her arms, watched silently from the wide second-floor balcony of the main house. Workers expertly secured the black car onto the carrier's flatbed. Its engine would never be started again. It was no longer a machine for driving, but a relic of the past being hauled away. Soon, the carrier began to move. The Maybach slowly receded from the estate where Cordelia was born and raised. She watched without blinking. It passed through the long approach, under the heavy iron gates, and finally disappeared from the estate grounds. The red glow of its taillights vanished around a bend in the tree-lined road. In that moment, a single, hot tear traced a path down Cordelia's cheek. It was not a tear of lingering affection for Caleb. It was not a tear of nostalgia for their happy days. It was a tear of farewell for her foolish past self, the pitiful woman who had been hurt, who had endured humiliation, who had clung to the illusion of love. With that tear, the Cordelia Sterling, who had been Caleb Thorne's wife, died completely. The past had now been reduced to ashes. Cordelia roughly wiped the tear away with the back of her hand. What remained was a surprisingly clear and serene heart. It felt as if a heavy weight that had been stuck in her chest for years had been washed away. Her body, her soul, felt light. "Bah," Leo cooed in her arms, a meaningless but precious sound. Cordelia gently nuzzled her cheek against her son's. He was warm, he was alive, the future was here. That evening at family dinner, Harrison looked at Cordelia intently before the meal began. Then, with eyes that seemed to see everything, he said, "You seem to have moved on." Cordelia met her father's gaze and smiled serenely. "Yes, Dad. As of today, my past is completely over." Harrison nodded deeply, satisfied. Her mother, sitting beside her, also looked relieved and gently squeezed her hand. "Then the timing is perfect," Harrison said as he unfolded his napkin. His voice had a definite ring to it, heralding the beginning of a new chapter. Next week is the annual Economic Summit Gala at the Plaza. You will come. Me? Yes. It is time for you to see the world where you belong. The new world where you will live from now on. The sudden, yet undeniable invitation took Cordelia by surprise for a moment. But then, she felt a faint but distinct excitement for a new challenge, budding deep in her chest. She was no longer bound by anything. Her life was her own. Yes, Dad, Cordelia nodded firmly. I would be honored to attend. Harrison's eyes, upon hearing her reply, shone with a deep satisfaction and an unwavering trust in his daughter. The door to a new world was now quietly opening before her. Several months passed after Cordelia shed the heavy, damp coat of her past. The seasons turned from winter to spring, and in the Sterling family's gardens, the first crocuses began to push through the once frozen earth. Cordelia's life revolved around the single, certain light of Leo's growth, calm and fulfilling. The day he first uttered the sound "Mama," the day he first rolled over each milestone was a priceless, shining gem in her memory. And then, the day of the Economic Summit Gala, which her father had foretold, arrived. For the first time in a long while, Cordelia stepped into the depths of her vast walk-in closet. There, the glamorous dresses she had collected in her single days, before meeting Caleb Thorne, slept quietly, having lost their owner. They all felt like someone else's clothes to her now. After some deliberation, she chose a long gown the color of the deep midnight sea. Devoid of any unnecessary embellishments, its simple yet perfect cut beautifully accentuated the lines of her body. It spoke not of a young girl's flamboyance, but of a mature woman's quiet confidence. She sat before the mirror and applied her makeup. Foundation to smooth her skin, eyeshadow to add depth, and finally, a lipstick in a subdued rose shade. The woman in the mirror was no longer the pitiful creature who had watched her husband's moods and endured her in-laws' barbs. She was Cordelia Sterling, a person who had reclaimed her dignity, who possessed an unshakable strength and a deep self-love gained through motherhood. "Oh, Cordelia, you look beautiful," her mother breathed as she entered the room. She gently placed a delicate necklace of scattered diamonds around Cordelia's neck. "Go on, dear. Or perhaps I should say, welcome back. To the place where you belong." To her mother's words, Cordelia responded with a quiet, knowing smile. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was electric, with the energy of the people who moved the country. The light from magnificent chandeliers reflected off polished glasses and the jewels of the women, scattering into countless particles of light. Political giants, titans of industry, cultural icons, and the ambitious young people trying to curry favor with them. This was the world Cordelia had once despised and run away from. But as she stepped into its vortex, escorted on the arm of her father, Harrison Sterling, what she felt was not fear or revulsion. It was a quiet exhilaration, like a general calmly observing the battlefield she was about to conquer. "Harrison, good to see you! And who is this beautiful young lady?" A portly former prime minister approached them with a jovial smile. "Allow me to introduce my daughter, Cordelia," Harrison would say each time, and a look of surprise, followed by open curiosity, would cross the other person's face. Most of them knew of the scandal the Sterling heiress had endured, but seeing the poised, dignified woman standing before them, they were visibly bewildered by the gap between the tragic heroine of gossip and the reality. Cordelia met their gazes without flinching, holding her head high. She would offer a perfect smile and an elegant curtsy. Her confident demeanor instantly transformed their vulgar curiosity into respect. In the corner of her eye, she could see her father smiling with satisfaction. Later, while her father was deep in conversation with an old friend, the chairman of a major bank, Cordelia stepped away from the crowd. She stood by the wall, sipping a glass of champagne and observing the throng. Just then, a calm, intelligent male voice spoke beside her. "You must be Cordelia Sterling." She turned to see a man standing there. He looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. His demeanor was the antithesis of Caleb's flashy ambition. It exuded a quiet confidence and deep culture. His sharp, clear eyes bespoke a keen intellect. For a moment, Cordelia was on guard. A strange man approaching her at a party usually meant one of two things: lust, or a calculated attempt to get close to the Sterling name. "I am," she replied, her face a mask of perfect politeness. "And you are?" The man, not flustered or overly familiar, simply bowed his head respectfully. "Forgive my forwardness. My name is Julian Vance. I'm the founder of Vance Capital." Vance Capital. Cordelia had seen the name in business journals. It was an up-and-coming independent investment firm that had achieved remarkable success in recent years by investing in cutting-edge fields like AI and fintech. Its young founder, Julian Vance, was famous for shunning the media, his face largely unknown, a mysterious but powerful figure. "Mr. Vance, I've heard of your work. The pleasure is all mine. I was speaking with Mr. Sterling earlier and happened to see you. I was so struck by your poise that I felt compelled to introduce myself. Please forgive me if I've disturbed you." His words lacked the sycophantic tone of flattery or social pleasantries. They conveyed only a sincere and genuine sentiment. "Not at all," Cordelia replied, the ice of her caution beginning to thaw just a little. Julian didn't force the conversation. He stood beside her, champagne glass in hand, and looked out at the crowd. "It's a wonderful party. But sometimes I wonder, behind all this glittering light, how much talent is out there, going unnoticed?" His words struck a chord with Cordelia. It felt as if he were talking about her former self, buried under the false persona of Caleb Thorne. "Isn't it your job, Mr. Vance, to find that very talent?" "It is," he said. "It's my life's work." He then turned to face her directly for the first time. His eyes were incredibly clear. "Miss Sterling, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but I was aware of your situation through the less-than-kind media reports." Cordelia's heart skipped a beat. So, that's his interest. But Julian's next words completely upended her expectations. "However, seeing you here tonight, standing on your own 2 feet, so completely unshaken, I am convinced of how unreliable such rumors are. You are a much stronger and more beautiful person than I ever imagined." Those words were not about Caleb, or her family, or her money. They were a clear, unvarnished tribute to Cordelia Sterling herself, the person everyone else had either pitied or ignored. Cordelia was speechless. She could feel a warmth spreading across her cheeks. It was as if a warm stone had been dropped into the frozen lake of her heart. "You're too kind," was all she could manage to say. "Not at all," Julian said, shaking his head gently. "I believe a truly strong person is not one who never falls in adversity. It is one who, after falling, can rise again even more beautifully." Then, as if nothing had happened, he gracefully changed the subject. "By the way, the painting on that wall, it's an early work by the American artist Jackson Pollock, isn't it? His drip painting technique represents the chaos and energy of life." Listening to his intelligent commentary, Cordelia realized that for the first time in a long time, she was having a conversation with a man as an equal. He wasn't interested in her father's influence or her family's wealth. He was simply interested in her as a person and was showing her respect. She was surprised by how pleasant that felt, how much it restored her sense of self-worth. Soon she sensed her father looking for her. The party was winding down. "Mr. Vance, I'm afraid I must be going." "Of course, thank you for your time." As he said this, he held out his smartphone. A QR code for exchanging contact information was on the screen. "If you wouldn't mind, I would very much enjoy speaking with you again about art or the economy. But please, don't feel obligated." His manner was so gentlemanly, so unassuming. Cordelia hesitated for a moment, but it seemed that what the man before her was offering was not ulterior motives, but a genuine token of intellectual curiosity and friendship. "Of course," she said. She took her own phone from her small handbag and scanned the code. After they had exchanged contacts, Julian took a small card from his pocket. "Actually, a special exhibition of Gerhard Richter's work is opening at the MoMA next week. Your father once mentioned that you have a deep appreciation for his art." The card was a special invitation to the exhibit. "If you'd like," Julian Vance said, looking directly into her eyes with a gentle smile, "would you care to join me?" His words were a quiet but firm knock on the long-frozen door of Cordelia's heart. A new wind, a new world. A sure premonition that her life was about to become colorful and vibrant once more, filled her heart with a sweet and slightly poignant anticipation. The encounter with Julian Vance was like the first ray of sunlight after a long winter, finally heralding the arrival of spring in Cordelia's heart. Their weekend visit to the Museum of Modern Art, as promised, became more than just an art viewing for her. It was a truly special time. Julian spoke about the art like an expert, but never in a pedantic way. In front of Gerhard Richter's photo paintings, he discussed memory, records, and the ambiguity of truth. Before the color chart paintings, he spoke of the beautiful coexistence of chance and order, and he politely asked for Cordelia's opinions. Each of his words was like fresh water for her intellectual curiosity, seeping into her parched soul. Dates with Caleb had always been about his bragging and high-end restaurants meant to satisfy his ego. There had been no real dialogue, but her time with Julian was filled with the satisfying joy of two minds, meeting, resonating, and elevating each other. As they sat in the museum cafe afterwards, Cordelia suddenly found herself speaking. "I want to start something. On my own." Julian looked at her, surprised but intrigued. "I could work for my father's company, I suppose. But I want something else. I want to build something, on my own 2 feet, for mothers and children who are suffering like I once did, unable to speak up or ask for help." It was a vague idea she had been nurturing deep inside since the day she had decided, in her humiliation, to donate the Maybach. Julian nodded slowly and deeply. His eyes held a sincere light, accepting her words not as the whim of a rich heiress, but as a cry from one human soul. "That's a wonderful, wonderful idea, Cordelia. If there's ever anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. That passion of yours will surely have the power to save many people." From that day on, Cordelia's world began to regain its color at an accelerated pace. She presented her idea to her father. She wanted to establish a charitable foundation for mothers and children. Harrison's eyes crinkled with joy at his daughter's first self-initiated vision for her future. He assembled the best lawyers, accountants, and consultants from Sterling Holdings to work for her. It wasn't just financial aid. It was a father's deepest expression of love, giving his daughter the strongest weapons and shields to realize her own dream. Cordelia threw herself into the preparations like a fish returned to water. She cared for Leo during the day, and after he was asleep, she would pore over vast amounts of data in her study and hold online meetings with experts. She absorbed knowledge voraciously, as if to make up for the years she had been isolated from society. She was no longer the frail woman who needed someone's protection. She was a young queen with a clear vision and an unshakable will, building her own empire. Julian Vance was also a constant presence, as a reliable advisor and a good friend. He provided information on advanced charity models from overseas and offered astute advice on running the foundation based on his own experience as a CEO. Their relationship was too intellectual and serene to be defined simply as romance. It was more like a partnership of souls who respected each other deeply as individuals and found joy in growing together. One day, on her way back from the office space she had rented for her foundation's preparations, Cordelia was gazing out the window of her car when a familiar, yet repulsive sight crossed her vision. In a dilapidated shopping district a little ways from the city center, in front of a grimy diner, a man in oil-stained work clothes was squatting on the ground with other day laborers, eating a stale hot dog. His back was hunched like a stray cat's, his vacant eyes seeming to curse the entire world. It was Caleb Thorne. The car drove past without stopping. Cordelia gave his form a single glance through the glass. She felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even pity. It was the same as seeing a stone on the side of the road. The man who was once her entire world was now just a part of an unfamiliar landscape, with no connection to her whatsoever. He was living the life he had chosen. And she was living the life she had chosen. That was all. In that moment, Cordelia clearly understood that she was truly free from the past. He no longer had a single line in her story. On a calm Sunday afternoon, when the spring cherry blossoms were in full bloom, Cordelia was walking in a large park with Leo and Julian. Leo was taking wobbly steps on the lawn, occasionally losing his balance and plopping down on the soft grass. Each time, Julian would laugh and say, "Whoa there, Leo, nice try," as he gently picked him up. The scene was so natural and warm, it gave Cordelia the pleasant illusion that the three of them had been spending their time like this for a long, long time. They walked slowly under the canopy of cherry trees. The falling petals drifted down on them like a benediction. "Cordelia," Julian said her name quietly. "Yes?" "Your foundation's name, Stella Maris. Star of the Sea. It's a beautiful name." "Thank you. I hope it can be a small beacon of hope for mothers lost at sea in a storm, like the North Star for sailors." "It will be. I know you can do it." As he said this, Julian gently placed his hand over hers. It was warm and strong, not the controlling strength of Caleb, but a supportive, protective strength. Cordelia was not surprised. She simply squeezed his hand back gently. No words were needed. There was no need for passionate declarations of love between them. There was only the unshakable certainty that their souls were quietly, surely, drawn to each other. With her other hand, Cordelia gently held the hand of her toddling son. In her right hand, the small, soft hand of her beloved son. In her left, the large, warm hand of a partner she respected and trusted. Cordelia looked up at the sky. It was a vast, cloudless blue. There was a time when she had looked up at this same sky and been crushed by despair. A time when she had cried in humiliation and cursed the world. But now, this sky seemed endlessly gentle, blessing her future without limit. She had her father, she had her mother, she had her beloved son, and she had a partner to walk with into the future. Her marriage to Caleb Thorne may have been the biggest mistake of her life, but it was because of those hellish days that she learned what true happiness was, and the value of standing on her own 2 feet. She was no longer an accessory to someone else. She was not the frail woman who couldn't survive without someone's protection. She was Cordelia Sterling, a mother, a woman, and the sole protagonist of her own life. "Mama," Leo called out in a clear voice from beside her. Cordelia bent down and gave her son the most gentle kiss in the world. Her life, in the truest sense, had only just begun. There might be difficulties ahead, but she was no longer afraid of anything. "My place is here." In the gentle sunlight, the sound of their 3 laughing voices echoed through the blooming cherry trees, on and on.